Hello, and welcome to the all-virtual SCAD Gaming Fest. My name is Nye Warburton, and I am the Associate Chair of Interactive Design and Game Development here at Savannah College of Art and Design. Now in its fourth year, SCAD Gaming Fest features 2 days of innovators and storytellers and designers, inviting festival participants to stand on the leading edge of game design and development. And our next panelist certainly exemplifies these characteristics. As the co-founder of Arty, a video game company developing advanced edge rendering and AI technology, Armando Kirwin is leading expert in the future of entertainment and game design industry. So please join me in welcoming Armando Kirwin. Thanks so much for being here. It's great to have you here. We really appreciate the time that you make. So why don't you talk a little bit about yourself first? What is your background and how did you get to where you're at?
Okay, sure. So I actually started in the film industry. And right out of college, I worked in the film industry for 6 years in visual effects, which was a very kind of formative time for me. I was really interested in the entertainment industry, and like VFX was kind of the combination of like the tech side of filmmaking and kind of the future. But after about 6 years, I worked on some big movies and stuff and ended up working at Paramount as a consultant on the VFX, activities there. But anyway, after 6 years, I kind of wanted to go deeper into, the film industry is ultimately kind of like a traditional space in the way that things are kind of created. And so I switched gears and went into startups. Which I've been doing now for about 11 years. I kind of fell into, at first, a startup that was in kind of making apps that were all related to content creation and curation and discovery. That was the founder of YouTube. It was actually his venture after selling YouTube to Google. And from there, I went into virtual reality, which I did for a number of years. And now I'm the co-founder of what we call a next-gen video game company. And so we're really interested in kind of bringing gaming to kind of like players in a unique way through our like special distribution and rendering technology, and also through AI to kind of engage players in a new way.
Very cool. So you have a little bit, you started in the Hollywood world, and then you came into the Silicon Valley world a little bit. Do you feel like you were able to take some of that storytelling over, or was it also difficult to kind of move industries?
They are similar in the sense that they're both like incredibly competitive and, high pressure, et cetera, worlds. But they're also kind of like oil and water.
Yeah. In
terms of process, startups are like presumably all about being nimble and trying new things. And the film industry is a little more traditional because movies have kind of been made the same way for about 100 years, basically. And like, that's the best way to make a movie. It's so fast and effective. So they don't really want to change too much. But they're ultimately both concerned with kind of like, distributing entertainment to people and finding new ways to entertain people. Mm-hmm. So they do kind of share those goals, at least the part of tech that I was in, like virtual reality, for example. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's some overlap there, but also some points of contention.
Sure. And how did you how did you go towards virtual reality? Do you think that's where it was going? And so you went that, or was that sort of a natural meander amongst the startups?
It was a bit of a meander, to be honest. It kind of like, it's a great story to say, oh yeah, I went from movies to VR, it's the future. But it was more of a friend kind of thing. I had been working in this kind of startup thing that I mentioned with the YouTube founder. And after a couple of years of doing that, I was actually trying to decide between going into crypto or VR. And I was interviewing at both companies. And I think I would have had a very different life if I went the other way. But I ended up joining a VR company that kind of was very early in the last kind of hype cycle, kind of what I call the wave of consumer VR. And we just kind of exploded and just, raised a ton of money and made all kinds of crazy VR. And then that company kind of started to flail around a bit, but I kept making it on my own with some financing from Google, actually. So I became really interested in combining VR with AI. And essentially, this was like 5 years ago or something. When you're in VR, it's this incredible experience because you're immersed into this world, which is often powered by a game engine, and your body is in the space, but you can't talk. So you're kind of like, you're physically there, but you're like muted. So it felt like it would be more immersive and more engaging if you could talk. So I got a little bit of money from Google to make one of the first VR experiences that used speech recognition technology to kind of bring you into the story. And we're going to show a clip now that was an example of kind of how that feels. So you'll hear my friend Weston talking to a character in VR. And what you're about to see is the view from the headset of him looking around. It's in a 360 environment, but you'll only see the rectangle of the field of view.
Cool. Let's take a look.
We can roll the first video, please.
I don't hear anybody outside yet. Do you?
No, I don't think so.
Shh. Keep your voice down. Okay. Now I'm gonna say why we had to be here so early and hide. But you have to keep it a best friend secret, okay? Will you tell me you promise?
Yes, I promise.
Okay, good.
Cool. So you look at that and you see this interaction with the character, right? We're not even thinking about artificial intelligence. How is artificial intelligence engaged in creating that, like, a better experience there?
So yeah, we're using, obviously speech recognition to understand Weston's voice, but we're combining it with natural language understanding, which provides kind of additional context about like the words that he's saying. So if you're newer to AI, speech recognition is more about just turning someone's speech into a bunch of text, which is really cool, but it's kind of limited because it doesn't have any contextual understanding of like the words, right? So because human communication is so complex, you have to do this second step, which is you need all this natural language understanding to kind of evaluate the text.
Yeah.
And then the game engine needs to take into account the kind of the results of the NLU to determine like what happens next in the game. Because obviously VR is powered by a game engine.
So let's unpack that a little bit. So, human language is so, you've got so many asides or, slang or things like that. I might say, that guy's nuts. And that might mean he's, an angry person or whatever. Like, how does an AI understand exactly what that means and then, figure that out? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, obviously this is a space of rapid improvement, and it's also been around forever, and it's had different iterations. And so the automatic speech recognition will take your voice and turn it into just words, right? Mm-hmm. And then the NLU will come along and try and understand, were you saying that guy is crazy or that guy is delicious food, Right. And so there's a couple different fields of thought. There are kind of the classic approaches that actually try to hard code some rules into the NLU. And then there are kind of like these newer kind of machine learning people, deep learning people who they use kind of like associations, like word vectors, basically. Like, in other words, they'll say like, they'll make these big, maps that represent words that are more likely to be next to each other. And they'll kind of try and automate the contextual understanding a bit instead of having to hard code everything. And, at Arty, we were actually pursuing a strategy of doing both of those things.
Right.
What most people do. They're
sort
doing
of a balance, right? You can't possibly write out all of the possible if-then. right? So you have
Sure,
to.
but you also can't rely purely on machine learning to magically figure everything out either.
So first of all, define machine learning. What does the term machine learning mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what I was saying. Like it's kind of like letting the work of figuring out these rules or relationships be done by machines. So it's a process that through iteration, the computer or program or whatever attempts to like understand some kind of relationship. And it's pretty incredible. And there's actually so many, it's kind of hard to define because there's so many different things it can be used for and different approaches and different schools of thought around machine learning, even just as a term. But that's kind of a simple way that I think about it. And then, but that obviously is a very different approach than trying to hand code everything and define all these rules as a human. So yeah, and we're just kind of exploring I'm really interested in just AI in general and gaming, but these are two different ways of these are two different kind of containers for that, VR and AR. Ultimately, as a company, we started as a AR company briefly, but we found that it was actually pretty hard to survive. It was kind of not as the booming industry we thought it would be. So we ended up focusing on games. One of the tricky things about AR is that when you're able to communicate with the game or a character in the game, you might want, in this case, Ashley too, to understand the environment. And so it kind of can break the illusion. Basically, the suspension of disbelief can break a lot more easily. If you're someone and you're talking to Ashley too, and you're what do you think of my house? But she doesn't know enough about your house because, we're not running computer vision algorithms that see kind of the table and the walls and stuff in your house. So we ended up focusing on gaming because it's it's a more constrained environment. Sorry if that didn't make a lot of sense, but SpongeBob we had control over his world. And it was a very small contextual slice of his world. Mm-hmm. So when you're trying to help him find this snail, you're saying, "Oh, go to the cat condo, go to the couch." We have a much smaller kind of domain space, where it's so it's a better experience, we think, to be in gaming right now. But we're really excited about kind of AR eventually, maybe.
Are you designing awareness then? Are you trying to figure out how to get better awareness? And
right.
Yeah,
and that's kind of one of the big problems, you'll hear about in AI, this idea of AI is really good when it's doing something really specific. And kind of these general AI problems are much more difficult. Being able to talk to an AI character about anything you want is not possible, but if you and SpongeBob are trying to find the snail in a specific environment, then we maybe have a better chance of successful interaction. So hopefully that makes sense. What I'm trying to say is we're getting away from AGI. We're trying to constrain the world and still entertain you and still engage you.
Right. Do you have to, is there a way to define the selective memory? I mean, about the age or where Gary is or things like that in the system? Are there the ways you think about that?
Yeah. So that's definitely kind of part of the future of some of this stuff that's at the very early stages right now. So right now, in terms of AI and gaming, things that work really well are speech recognition. And then things that work kind of well are maybe some NLU, where it's oh, he said he was 35 or he said he was happy. Things that don't work well at all right now are changing the story, the game dynamically, like generating new stuff, basically. Like we're kind of at the like understanding stuff phase right now. Like we're trying to understand as much as we can about the player and maybe their environment, like the next few videos will show. And then eventually it'll be about taking those inputs in and generating a more personalized game on the fly, generating speech dynamically and that kind of stuff. So kind of the output side is in its infancy currently.
Right. You're good. You're getting better at the input side of things right now.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So it's kind of like your Alexa or something. Like it's pretty good at understanding you when you ask questions, but like you can't have a conversation because Alexa can't generate, arbitrary responses to you yet. So natural language generation is like has a long way to go compared to natural language understanding.
Gotcha.
And synthetic speech has a long way to go compared to speech recognition. But they make progress every day. It's pretty wild.
Are there other ways that you can get these patterns or awareness besides speech recognition? Are there other ways that other AI that you're using?
Yeah, so it's all there is a trend now towards these like multimodal approaches, which means like, do we know stuff about you as a player that we can incorporate into the decision that the game engine is making? Can we look at the things you've said before to make inferences? And we should probably play the next two videos, but like, what happens when we turn the camera on your phone and start looking at you directly while you're playing a game? So why don't we play the next video real quick and bring that into the conversation? Yeah.
Chair. Refrigerator. Coffee mug.
Obviously very demo, like very prototypey. But the idea is like with the AR demo that we showed, the character on the table, like what happens when that character can actually see through the camera that you have a coffee cup on your table, and the character can be like, hey, what kind of coffee do you drink? That would blow people's minds. So when you start combining all of these things into one engine, and one kind of decision point in the game, and like combining all these inputs, your mind starts to wander a little bit about the future. So we can just go ahead and play the last video, I think, and bring it all together. Oh my God, that was a little longer than I thought it was. But you get the idea. And so that was happening in Unity. So it's like a game engine that's used by a lot of people. So all the demos you're seeing are in Unity. So that's kind of like the idea is to like combine all of these inputs into something that a game engine can use.
Great. So you're essentially recognizing a coffee cup, and then you're recognizing a face. Right.
And emotion from the face, you can recognize emotion. Yeah.
And does it get better at it? I mean, what if you get the coffee cup wrong? It would destroy the reality, right?
Right. That's the hard part about from a game design perspective. There's going back to film, like there's this thing called suspension of disbelief, which is like when you're watching a movie, there's a language, there's certain things that need to happen to not violate your suspension of disbelief. And if that happens, it kind of completely takes you out of the movie. I can't remember, but I remember some movie that was like famous that like at one point, like the microphone dipped into the screen and like they somehow missed it. And it's just like totally ruins the moment, And so all of this AI stuff, despite the fact that it's getting better every day, and you can imagine this world where you have automatic speech recognition and NLU and, environment awareness through computer vision and player awareness through computer vision. You can imagine all those things together getting better and better. But if there's a bad result, like the character in the game or whatever completely botches, it will definitely break the illusion. It'll violate suspension of disbelief. So if it becomes a design issue, though, there are ways to solve that. So, for example, what if you were playing a game and you're interacting with like an alien that doesn't know Earth and is always getting things wrong? You might be more forgiving.
Right.
So there are kind of like ways to deal with the nascent state of the tech through game design and world building.
Right. That's a really interesting point. Yeah, because I get frustrated with Siri and Alexa when they just don't understand what I'm saying. So if this character is pivotal or the environment is pivotal and you get something wrong, they're going to be like, oh, they're using AI right now. I can tell. That's right. That ruins it.
And I have a friend, Eugenia, who has a company called Replica, and they make it's an amazing company, and they make chat bots for lonely people, and they have avatars and things. And she told me something really interesting, which is that like for that type of person who doesn't have a lot of human contact and actually is willing to pay to interact with an AI and have a relationship with an AI, they're extremely forgiving because they get all this value from the relationship. And whenever the AI fails during the conversations, the subscribers, they actually say things like, oh, don't worry, you'll understand that eventually. Your AI just needs to get upgraded a few times and you'll be okay, stuff like that. So it depends on the world of the game, but it also depends on the player. And it's, I think what's interesting though is to just let your mind wander and just fast forward 10 years and like how good could the tech be,
As a designer, do you think like, oh, here's a cool tool, or do you start from, or do you have to kind of go back and forth? You said you've narrowed your scope to do games because it gives you the opportunity to work with just the inputs. Do you kind of come at it with that perspective, or are you just sort of playing tools and smashing it together and see if it works?
Yeah, it's all very exploratory right now. I think that, it's kind of like the tech might surprise you at any moment. There are like things like, like you've probably seen some of these natural language generators that are like text, right? That are being used to generate like fake news articles or like entire games. There's this like dungeon game that you can play that's text-based. Like they're getting pretty good, although they do catastrophically fail, every now and then. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's exciting, and you never really know like when it's just gonna like get over this, into this next phase. For us as a company, like we realized we were maybe like a touch too early when we launched. And we've had to, simplify a bit in terms of like what we can do commercially with this technology today. So yeah, it's, but again, letting your mind wander 10 years, it gets pretty fun.
What about accessibility? And a lot of these models require data, and if you don't have any, or if they're pre-existing models, they only do what's already been trained and things like that. Is there ways that you can go about using these as a creative?
Right. Yeah, that's a big problem, right? So you have a lot of the data, unfortunately, locked up in big companies, and then you have a lot of issues of kind of discrimination and things that are baked into the data. So one of the things going way back to my VR project, which was before this company even existed, we had this issue where people would laugh while playing the game, and Google's had never considered that someone might be laughing. and it just ruined everything. Like it just completely just wrecked the game. Because like when they were building that data set for speech recognition, they never thought, oh, let's get some laugh stuff too. Like we might need that for something. Like it was this like really kind of, just kind of, I don't know what to say about that. Like Black Mirror-esque kind of moment for me. I was like, all right, the most advanced AI company in the world, and they didn't even think that
Right.
laugh would exist. So we actually had a problem where if people laughed playing our game, that the game would get like super confused and try and convert their laughing into words.
Right.
It was quite a headache, but eventually, hopefully there will be better and better public data sets and more variety over time. So it's kind of something we're all going to have to work on together.
I'm actually amazed about the community seems to, all the archive and all the GitHub, there just seems to be a lot of open source initiatives and things like that. Do you feel that there's sort of this collective use of AI, or do you still feel like it's very dominated by the Facebooks and the Amazons?
It's still really dominated, but there is definitely a strong, one of our former lead scientists was like a speech recognition person who is from Mozilla, who now has his own startup. And there is definitely a very strong community of like open source kind of advocates that will collect data and, annotate it and release it to the public and stuff like that. But comparatively, it's obviously not nearly as well funded as like something coming out of the giant tech, companies that are worth like nearly $1 trillion or whatever.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about sort of future thoughts in terms of like what creators can start doing in gaming. You say think out in 10 years. Is there a way that you can kind of start defining what you think that means? Like what kinds of things can be done? And then also like maybe we could start talking about what the future generations can start doing to start moving in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting time because like the tech has never been better. Yet it still has a ways to go, but it's never been better. So there are some interesting things to be made right now for some ambitious people who want to try and solve this with design thinking. Like the example I gave of like the alien who's not from Earth, and so whenever the AI messes up, it's cute, or whatever. Yeah. So that's the place to be if you're interested in, I think, the kind of like the future of AI and gaming is like trying to solve this with design. Because it's such a rapidly innovating space, it feels like it's just going to get better and better, like monthly or weekly. But in the history of AI, there have been these moments where, things have plateaued.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes, right? So like we don't actually know, but to me, there's this inevitability about it. Can't say that word. Sorry. That seems like it's going to be something that games use, relatively soon. If you're a student today, it seems like it's certainly going to happen in your career.
What makes you more confident about that? I mean, what is going on in AI now versus what's happened in the past that kind of it petered out? I mean, is it just better
yeah,
code?
We haven't, like, all this commercial applications of AI are relatively new. So like we're kind of at the beginning of the non-like research kind of R&D or like education kind of eras of AI. So that, it seems, maybe I'm being optimistic, but it seems like a good time to assume that like the commercial side of this stuff is going to improve. Although like what's really interesting is how kind of like it exploded onto the scene like maybe a year ago or something with things like Alexas and stuff, or even 2 years ago. But then there was this like somewhat of a backlash in terms of the privacy issues, right? So like we definitely have to kind of sort those issues out as we go.
Yeah, I mean, do you find that your tests, the user feels concerned, hey, you actually can see me? Does that feel difficult for a player in a game of yours?
I think it's going to end up being a generational thing. like a lot of tech, unfortunately. But I think that if AI gets really good and you're a kid and you can hang out with your favorite comic book character in your bedroom wearing AR glasses or something, like it's probably gonna be pretty darn cool. So like you might be willing to like give up a little bit of privacy, quote unquote, to have that experience, right? So like it's over time, it seems inevitable. Okay, I said it right. Okay. Because of the potential to kind of have that type of interaction, just probably going to be pretty awesome. So, yeah, it's an exciting space for sure. Lots of questions, and it's this interesting kind of situation where you're taking video game engines and like game design, you're mashing it with like really complicated kind of AI technology that spans everything from speech to natural language to computer vision. And you're also bringing in kind of like the ethics of that. And you're trying to figure out if, like this is how to do this without like upsetting a bunch of parents. So I think Nye might have frozen and he's gone.
Hi, Armando. I'm
Yeah.
going to jump on screen to continue moderating for just a moment.
Okay.
Before we're getting Nye to come right back. Everyone, I'm Brantley Watts. I'm the Assistant Director of SCAD Film. Thank you for your patience. Question. We talked a little bit before about emotion and AI.
Mhm.
And I think we talked a little bit about how that's going to be kind of the new frontier. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So emotion recognition turns out to be like one of the lower hanging fruits of AI. So, with the computer vision demo you saw of the face, there's a lot of research that's already been done about taking kind of facial features and corresponding that to like emotion and engagement.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like one of these other like things that might happen earlier on in the kind of intersection of AI and gaming. It might simply be about emotion recognition and engagement recognition stuff at first. Whereas things like really complicated speech and NLU are going to take
A little bit longer.
A little bit longer, yeah. So we're pretty excited about that. And I actually did a side project that specifically focused on emotion recognition that was at the Biennale in Venice 2 years ago. And it was a VR project where you were having a conversation with this AI powered kind of chat situation. And we did emotion recognition. And the AI was kind of asking you questions about your life, to try and elicit a little bit more of an emotional response. And then depending on what you said, the environment changed. So it's pretty like, it's an exciting kind of really ripe thing to explore, because you just have to imagine, like, if you're a student or not, but like what is a game that uses emotional input from the player? Like, what the heck should that even be?
What do you think it should be? I'm curious to know how it works and what's being done now.
I think, to me, what gets really interesting is just like, this is just totally personal, but I'm really interested in people having emotional reactions in general. That aren't one-dimensional, but like this VR thing, for example, like what happens when you're playing a game that like where you're talking and because of the things you're saying, like it gets real, and like you have like a moment, like that's not something you necessarily do when you're playing like an iPhone game or something, So I'm personally very interested in like kind of the explorations that can be done there. And like seeing what, like we were talking about the movie industry earlier, like there's a lot of emotional range when you consume a movie.
Of course.
Right. And some people love horror and other people love to just, watch whatever, The Notebook and cry for like an hour. So like,
Right.
Can we do that with AI? I've been waiting for someone to make an AI that just like makes me bawl, but hasn't happened yet. So somebody in the audience, you should make that. I want to do it.
Now, the project that you were talking about previously, was that the bouquet project that you were referring to? Will you elaborate on that just a little bit? Because honestly, when we spoke before, that was one of my favorite projects that you spoke about.
Yeah, I should have put some screenshots or something, but
it's fine. We had a lot to talk about today. So
yeah, so it was kind of the spiritual successor to the VR thing that I did. The first VR thing I did with Google was like just getting speech recognition and NLU, like working in VR. But it was kind of like a comedy thing with the whole laughing issue. And so the next thing I did was another kind of these art projects. It was sponsored by Verizon's immersive studio called Riot. And the idea was to put people in VR in this like really calm world that was designed by there's this sculptor who's based in Tokyo, who's the world's most prominent kind of sculptor who uses flowers instead of like clay. And he creates these crazy, beautiful sculptures with flowers. And he has a really cool story, like his personal life story. And he has a really cool philosophy about life and death. And like his art really just explores kind of like growing and decaying and the meaning of life and stuff like that. So anyway, you go in VR and you're surrounded by all of these crazy, custom like flowers and stuff. And you hear his voice. It's trilingual actually, so you can choose French, Japanese, or English. But anyway, he starts interviewing you about your own life. And there are a series of questions. And as you answer them, we're not only analyzing the words, but we're analyzing your sentiment, which is kind of like your emotional response. And that procedurally generates a unique bouquet that represents your life. Right. And it was a successful project. We were in competition at Venice with that. Right. And I think we came really close to winning, but we did not win. But that's okay. It was for the art. But people had a good response to that because that was me trying to get people to get really real with AI. Like talk about heavy stuff. Yeah. Right. I mean, it's kind of groundbreaking, and I think that's why it resonated so much with me. And also looking at the bouquet, it was beautiful. It was incredibly beautiful. Thank you. We could talk about this on and on. I do want to ask one quick question, and then we're going to go ahead and head to the chat and to the audience Q&A. I know that with VR, you have programs like Oculus for Good. There are resources out there for content creators to be making projects like that. Are there any resources similar to that for AI? So I'm a VR for Good alum, by the way. I'm not surprised. Love that program, but there's such a great group within Oculus. But anyway, there's something called Games for Change. Okay. That my super cool friend Jesse Damiani is involved with, who you guys should follow on Twitter if you're interested in this kind of stuff. But they might still be calling themselves XR for Change. I can't quite remember if they changed their name. Anyway, that is the closest I can think of. Okay. And I know that they're curating the next one right now. It's normally in New York, but I think it's virtual this year. So it's really cool. And the VR clip that you saw at the beginning of this, that was actually at the last Games for Change. Okay. All right. So everyone that is in the audience, make note of that. Games for Change, if you're looking for extra resources to create your own AI content.
And with that, I want to go ahead and start taking some questions from the audience. First up, we have Nico, who's going to ask a question.
All right, hello, my name is Nico Spoth. I'm a junior game design major with a minor in dramatic writing. And my question for you is, how do you feel about technologies like deep learning super sampling or DLSS? And do you think they're useful for game development specifically, or are there better ways to use AI to push hardware?
Deep learning super sampling. I'll look this up and make sure I know what you're talking about.
So basically, I don't know if I'm going to be very good at explaining.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like using AI to expand on the information that like it wasn't in the original kind of. Yeah.
It can basically take 1080p images and make them look 4K by just kind of like gauging what they think like the pixels would look like and just making them like show more detail. It's very interesting.
It's so cool. Honestly, it's one of those like things that is like perfect for deep learning, because like they can just like let it kind of, they can, you know, it's a perfect example of something that doesn't need to understand the world at all. Like, and so, you know, I don't know what it can be used for storytelling purposes. I have never thought about it that way. But it's a very cool example of deep learning. Like style transfer is another kind of similar bucket that's like taking something and making it look like, it's almost like a Snapchat filter, but like times 10, you know? Right now, all of the deep learning is really good at stuff like this. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to try and make that like relevant within like a game or something. I have no idea, but I would say that I've never seen anyone try that, so it's worth thinking about.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nico. Okay, next we have Alexis, who has a question.
Heyo. When coding an AI, should the possibility for tactical mistakes be programmed in to give it a more human feel? Oh, and I'm Alexis Harrington, and I'm a fourth-year ITTM major at SCAD Atlanta.
Nice to meet you.
Nice.
Yeah, I think so, because you know, chances are, like even in our simple games and stuff, like you're probably going to get it wrong. So that's part of the tricky thing about the state of the tech right now. So I think it's best to assume that you're going to, like you said, tactically make a mistake, and have like a bunch of safety nets in place. So for example, when you do the dialogue flow, like a lot of the responses, even though they seem really specific, are actually kind of generic too, in a subtle way, in case we thought we understood what you were saying, but we didn't quite, and like they kind of cover a couple different options. So yeah, I think we're at the state today where you definitely have to assume you're gonna have tactical errors. Or
Not quite what I was asking. I meant more like tactical mistakes and like let me see, for example, first-person shooter AI or something where, you know, to give it a more human person feel when playing against it, like miss you a few times, because whenever I see AI games and see them like make a mistake, like in a rhythm game, missing some beats, I wonder how the AI person coded it in there.
They do that all the time. That's a big thing where, and in fact, I think it's Call of Duty Mobile. It's one of the biggest ones, multiplayer first-person shooters right now. Like you legit think you're playing a human for the first several hours of that game. They move like humans, they make mistakes, they're named like humans, they interact with you like humans. You're not. You're just playing AIs that are like training you before they drop you into the game with actual people. So that's been a thing for actually like over a decade. You don't want your AI to be so realistic that it frustrates players. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alexis. That was actually a really great question. Okay, so we've got another question from Christian Wins, who wants to know, how do you handle situations? And this kind of tags on to Alexis' question a little. How do you handle situations where players deliberately try to stump and confuse the machine learning? such as by speaking nonsensical sentences, for example?
You know, it happens. I had this really surreal experience once where I put someone in a VR, AI powered VR thing that I made and left him alone in a room. And I came back, I was like, why is this guy taking so long? And I went back and he had been just in there trying to like troll the game, which I could not understand, because I'm like, you are alone. You are like, a lot of the troll behavior is about getting a rise out of another human. So trolling an AI is like an exercise in futility. Like, the AI does not care. It will just keep going all on its way, trying to do whatever it's programmed to do. It was the most bizarre thing to see someone spend so much time doing it, but I don't know what he got out of it. But it is a thing. There's a really interesting area called reinforcement learning. And that's when you kind of like take input, like say from players or like people talking to your bot or whatever, and you like use that as training data to like improve your AI. And there are a lot of famous examples, but one of the most famous is when Microsoft released this bot on Twitter, and like immediately the internet just showed up and just trained it to be like super racist. And it was horrible, you know, and like it was just like a huge disaster. So we actually don't do any reinforcement learning. We like take in more pure data and upgrade our models and double check everything and then release them. And that's because this reinforcement thing is so tricky to do with the sheer number of trolls. So so it's a two-part answer. One is like, because of troll behavior, reinforcement learning is a little tricky. But also, if someone wants to troll your AI is just not going to care. And in a way, you can kind of just leave them over there. And our lead game designer at Arty worked on some really famous games before joining our company. And he said what they would do with cheaters is the same. They would actually put all the cheaters together in a little tiny sandbox once they flag them as cheaters, and let everyone else kind of have a normal experience playing the games.
Okay, I like that. We have a question from our amazing Professor Tina O'Haley. Can you use FACE, Dr. Ekman's emotion analysis system, cataloging with facial recognition to read the emotions? Yeah,
people use that that's used industry-wide.
Okay.
So they'll take you saw the feature analysis demo, like they'll take those points and they will kind of they'll match them up with that classification that this that she's talking about. And it's actually one of the reasons why face recognition is so easy to do in a game, is that once we can see your face and take all of those points and simplify it down to a smaller subset of points, and then associate them with this well-defined data set, you're off to the races. You can do real-time analysis that way. So that research is part of what makes emotion recognition so easy. And that's been around for quite some time.
Okay. Eva has a question, and she wants to know, how much do you think AI is going to contribute to everyday life?
That's a simple quote now. Quite a bit. I think it depends on when. Eventually, I think a lot. Today, I still think we're in the beginning. You know, like when I used to talk at conferences and stuff, I would always get concerned questions about, like, is my child going to have a relationship with an AI instead of a human? And it's like, intellectually, I think the answer is yes, in a long time, but I don't know exactly when, but it seems like it. You know, so look at Replica, the company I mentioned. They have millions of people who have, relationships with AIs today. So, Yeah, with VR and other kind of ways of experiencing that relationship, it seems like it's going to happen.
It's very, very interesting.
Like the movie Her, you know.
Yes,
is a good
yes.
example.
I think that was actually referenced in the chat earlier. Unfortunately, we are out of time. And I did want to note that Professor Warburton unfortunately had a power failure, and he apologizes for being unable to sit through the rest of the session. But Armando, you have been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us again at SCAD and for talking about this fascinating subject. SCAD Gaming Fest is going to continue with our Spotlight Award presentation at 6 p.m., which is in just 5 minutes, with honoree Will Wheaton. Please also tune in to some amazing programming tomorrow, including our Rocket League esports competition streaming on Twitch. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the festival, and everybody, let's give Armando a round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.